So I'm Greg Slobodkin, editor-in-chief of scienceboard.net, and I have with me Professor Laertis Ikonomou, who is associate professor in the Department of Oral Biology at the University of Buffalo. Welcome, Professor.
It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And it's great to have you with the first day of ISCT starting in San Francisco. And I know you're involved with one of the committees there, and perhaps we can start with that. I mean, tell us a little bit about, the Ethics of Cell and Gene Therapy Committee that I believe you chair, and who sits on the committee and what is its mandate?
Yes, so that's correct. I've been the chair of the Committee on the Ethics of Cell and Gene Therapy since 2020. In fact, the name was different back then. It was a very long name. It was Presidential Task Force on the Use of Unproven and/or Unethical Cell and Gene Therapies. But that's a rather unwieldy name, so we decided to change it, make it shorter, and also more encompassing of our to reflect our mission. So now it's the Committee on the Ethics of Cell and Gene Therapy. This committee has wide expertise. So we have 19 members. We have people from various fields, including basic scientists, clinician scientists, scientists that work in industry, in translational projects, regulatory science experts, public policy experts, and bioethicists. So it's a wide representation of different sectors, and that brings a lot of combined expertise in what we do. But also we have a wide geographical representation. We have members from the United States, Europe, United Kingdom, England, Belgium, Italy, and Spain, and also from Australia, Iran, and India. So again, we are the Committee for International Society, we're trying to have members from as many regions as possible.
Wow, yeah, that's quite a membership internationally. In terms of the committee and the reasons behind forming it, is it fair to say that these kinds of unproven, unethical cell and gene interventions are prevalent? Is it a growing problem? Is it something that you've seen growing?
Yes, it's growing. Has been growing for many years now. So when the committee was first formed, was mostly focused on cellular therapies. That was almost 10 years ago. And I think it was the beginning of this, of seeing the emergence of this global industry. So back then, I would say our mandate was more focusing of really figuring out what's going on with this industry. We could see that emerging everywhere. Would see clinics. In fact, back then the prevalent position was there is a lot of stem cell medical tourism. People move from certain countries to certain destination countries. In fact, that's changed a lot in the last 10 years. Now there are unproven direct-to-consumer businesses everywhere, so people don't really have to move from one region to the other. They can just go in their neighborhood and get this type of unproven treatments, unfortunately. So as the committee evolved, as the industry evolved, we also evolved in the way of looking things and evaluating this industry. So I would say currently we have a pretty good idea of what this industry is. So it's a global industry. That's a borderless problem. A lot of studies have come out in the last 6, 7, 8 years when they have characterized both direct-to-consumer business at a global level, but also at a national level. And we know they're everywhere in all continents and in many, many countries. And I'll just give you a kind of sobering example. In the US, there was a recent study by Lee Turner, who is also sitting on our committee, that was able to identify more than 2,500 locations for this type of businesses. So it's really blooming, and that's not a good sign.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think you've also done research specific to COVID. I mean, since the start of the pandemic, there's been some ethical issues in terms of public communications and related to the development of cell-based therapeutics for COVID specifically, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, so we published four of the members of the committee, we published a paper last year seeing how things evolved during the 2 years of the pandemic. When we published our paper, we're getting increasingly frustrated with the landscape of cell therapy development. So on one hand, we had a lot of direct-to-consumer businesses that have been there forever. Now they were kind of switching gears and they were offering so-called treatments for COVID. And as we indicate in our publication, there were a lot of vague claims of wellness, anti-inflammatory action of these unproven and unlicensed treatments, and that the moment one sees such vague claims, one should be very suspicious. So that was part of the problem. The good thing is regulatory agencies everywhere, particularly in the United States, they crack down immediately on this type of businesses. We had approximately 22, 23 letters from the FTC, the US FTC and FDA to this type of businesses, very strongly worded. And I think a lot of them just disappeared, or they either stopped offering these treatments or they just brought down their website, so it was not easy anymore to track them. That's also a common tactic. Now, on the other hand, we also saw a lot of overpromise, a lot of press releases, even academic centers promising, emphasizing new treatments, emphasizing preliminary findings or small-scale clinical trials. And that's understandable on one hand, on the one hand, because there was this urgency. We still remember the very first days when there were no available treatments or there were no vaccines for COVID-19. So every little piece of good news was really welcome. But at the same time, I think that created kind of feed when this type of low quality information was circulating also in the rhetoric of the direct-to-consumer businesses. So we got into a situation when I'm fodder to the rhetoric of the direct-to-consumer businesses. So that's what we try to emphasize in this piece, that there were very much for, or a good process for getting an objective image of cell-based therapeutics for COVID-19.
When it comes to those centers, and you saw a proliferation of centers in the U.S., for instance, that were engaging in this kind of unethical behavior, did it mostly relate to the use of stem cells? Was that the intervention that was being advertised for COVID?
Yes, a lot of them were advertising cell-based interventions, so autologous or umbilical cord or perinatal tissue-derived tissues products for COVID-19. But we saw also some of these clinics or businesses to offer extracellular vesicle or so-called exosome treatments. So these are cellular products, they're not cells themselves. So I would say these were the main two classes of treatments we saw being offered. And to be clear, neither has been officially approved by the FDA for treatment of any respiratory disease, including COVID-19.
Another area I think the committee has looked into is the whole issue of cell banking, right? You issued a paper on that. So I think the paper itself was talking about the peril of, the potential promise of speculative cell banking. And so what was the thrust of that paper, and perhaps explain, what the perils are of cell banking as you see it?
Yes, so there is what we call speculative cell banking. Just to clarify, there are cell banks out there, and some of the cell banks are part of legitimate therapeutic development. So there are, for example, cord blood cell banks that have been offering products for hematopoietic disorders. That's a very limited set of conditions, but these are products that have been proven and approved for this type of conditions. I will not call speculative, but we've seen also emergence, and that's not a recent phenomenon. I just think it comes with any new technology that is out there. Then we have the corresponding offering through cell banks. I'll just give you an example. Many years ago, when we talk about that in our paper, we had the emergence of cell banks offering to store dental stem cells, so-called dental stem cells. And a lot of the marketing claims back then were pretty outrageous. They were very wide, so that these cells one day, they are so plastic that they can be used for not just fixing teeth, but also for cure diabetes cures, Alzheimer's cures. So there were a lot of extra exaggerated claims. And now with the advent of CAR-T products, and as we see, there are more and more approved CAR-T products. So this seems to be a technology that it's taking hold, and it's been very successful. It's been approved in a lot of jurisdictions, and it's also very importantly been reimbursed in a lot of jurisdictions. Now we start seeing the emergence of T-cell banking. So businesses that offer to cryo-store T-cells with for a prospective use. In the future, if one needs CAR-T therapy, they can. The claim is that they can use these cells, they can thaw them, maybe expand them, engineer them, and then use them for to generate a CAR-T product. Now, we were very concerned about these claims, and we took this initiative back in 2019. The ISCT took the initiative to issue a statement of concern first, and then to form a coalition of ISCT with other organizations to counteract these claims and also kind of fight back against this industry. So then we published, as you mentioned, a couple of papers where we expounded on the our arguments on why this is not correct in terms of regulatory science, in terms of science, and in terms of clinical applications. So we think, just to summarize this argument, that there is a lot of overpromise there. There is not a clear path from cryo-stored cells at the present to a CAR-T product. So that is overpromising and promising that this can be used for cell therapies when that's not possible. Even starting from the simple fact there is no chain of custody. So one can give their cells, but then I doubt there will be currently any CAR-T developer that will take this type of cells or accept this type of cells to derive a product. And I also think the science is not there to support these claims. And definitely there is also the ethical issue of overpromising or pushing people to store their cells with kind of an emotional language, that this is going to be used for a life-saving treatment in the future. I think that is, from a bioethical point of view, is quite problematic to use this type of language.
I'm sure your committee and you have thought about this in terms of the ethics of cell and gene therapy, but what can be done to promote safe and effective practices when it comes to CGT?
Yeah, so I think people that develop cell and gene therapies, they should adhere to strict ethical standards, first of all. Then there will always be bad players, so people that believe that they can offer products outside the purview of regulatory agencies. They will always try to find loopholes, or they can claim that their products are not under the regulatory authority of, let's say, the FDA. So for these players, I think there must be, when they clearly break the law, or they offer products that are unproven and unlicensed, there should be more enforcement. That's one solution. I don't think it's the only solution, but the entry to this space should, the bar to the entry to this space should be much higher, because that was the problem initially 10, 15 years ago. I think a lot of opportunistic players realized that the bar to entry was pretty low, so they just entered the space and they're still there. So we should learn from our mistakes, our collective mistakes, and also be able to deal with that better in the future. And also, I think the mission of organizations such as the ISCT is not, of course, to police this space. We're not the ethical or the regulatory police. That's not our role. And the mandate, for example, of our committee is to educate and analyze this type of practices. analyze practices, identify problematic practices, and then educate the public and the stakeholders. So then organizations such as the ISCT have a big role to play, because we can use our expertise to inform the public and develop resources, point out that a lot of these products are unsafe and ineffective. And there are a whole host of harms that are related to their use, from financial harms, or rather from the physical harms that are pretty evident and sometimes are very bad harms. So we've seen people getting blinded, people getting contaminations, infections. But then I would say there are also important harms that a lot of people don't realize. There is this argument, I have nothing to lose, so I can try that. But people have a lot to lose, because these are expensive products, and sometimes businesses urge people or push them to come back for repeated injections. So that becomes very expensive very rapidly, and there is a big financial harm there. And we should not forget about the psychological harms. People get their hopes up. They are administered by one of these products, and then they have a lot of dust hopes because these products don't work. So there are a lot of harms associated, and I think how we can ensure safe and effective practices also point out all these harms. Say people have to lose a lot when they go and start getting these products.
Let me ask you something. I mean, how did you get involved in the ethical aspects of this technology? You have a lab in the Department of Oral Biology at the University of Buffalo. Is this somehow leveraging that work? And how did your interest in the area come about?
Yes, so that's a long story. It didn't happen overnight. It happened a long time ago. In fact, my lab is a basic research lab. I work a lot on the models of neural crest and foregut development, such as lung and thyroid development, and also using induced pluripotent stem cells in my research. So as many scientists, or even clinicians, and I was not aware of this industry. So I became aware back in 2013 as a member of the American Thoracic Society. We had a stem cell working group, and we decided to go and visit this issue of so-called stem cell medical tourism. So I volunteered to kind of coordinate activities, look at more into this industry. And the more I looked into that, the more shocked I was, because frankly, as a basic scientist, I had no idea these practices are so widespread. And even now, when I talk to a lot of clinicians or basic scientists, they don't understand the extent, or they are not aware of the extent of this industry. So that's how I became interested. Of course, my research informs my arguments, because I do basic research. I try to be as rigorous as possible. So when I see this stark contrast with being rigorous on one hand and then having these people out there just making these outrageous claims about safety, efficacy of their products, that really makes me very angry. So anger is not my only motivation, but I think it is important to know that this industry is out there, and also make me more aware that I have to talk to scientists, not only to the public, and educate them about this industry. Because fortunately, most people are not aware of the extent and the variety of offered products out there, and the ways that these businesses have to elude regulatory oversight.
In terms of regulatory agencies, you feel like the FDA and other regulatory bodies in different countries, do you feel like there's an awareness of this problem?
Yeah, I think that the regulatory agencies, not only in the US, but everywhere, are acutely aware of this problem, but sometimes it's just too hard to contain it. That became painfully evident in the US when we have this period of the 3-year period of enforcement discretion on the part of the FDA, and instead of seeing less and less companies staying in this space, we saw more and more. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we now have more than 2,500 locations when these businesses offer products. So once the genie is out of the bottle, sometimes it's very hard to contain it. And we have also to be aware of the fact that regulatory agencies have limited resources, so they cannot polish all this space. They try hard, but I think it's going to be a concerted effort between regulators, scientific and professional societies, and also the public to kind of diminish the allure of this, because there is nothing, or despite their claims, there is nothing magical about the products they offer.
Well, very good. Dr. Ikonomou, I want to thank you for your time, especially with the start of ISCT in San Francisco. And hopefully we'll get a chance to meet up in the not too distant future, whether it's here in Buffalo or on the conference trail.
Yeah, that would be great. And thank you so much for the invitation. And it was great being here today.